Hello, hello, hello. How are you guys doing today? I wasn't really sure what channel to post this on. I actually started this video and I was posting it on my Peterisms channel because I wanted to talk about something very, very specific that happened in therapy today. But over here on my Peter Does Stuff channel, I have been doing updates on OCD and the trauma narrative and a lot of things that are coming out of therapy. So I thought, why not put this over on my Peter Does Stuff channel instead? And have a little conversation about it over here, because this is typically where I do like my therapy updates. If I do them, I talk about them in my vlog, but I also talk about them specifically over here. So I kind of wanted to talk about something that came out of therapy today, because it was really interesting, and I think also a lesson to other people. And so when I learn things, I like to pass them on. So for those of you that don't know, I've been in individual therapy for the last couple of years, more intensively, after the accident and things like that. My husband and I had been in marriage counseling before that, and I have been doing individual counseling as well. And we are still in marriage counseling. In fact, today, I had individual counseling at 1 o'clock, then filming videos in between, and then at 6 o'clock, we're having marriage counseling again. We go about every 2 or 3 weeks now. And then tonight, I'm going to a meeting with my best friend, and so it's like a day of healing. It's a feel-good day of healing in the life of Peter Monn. And for those of you that don't know, I've talked about this on other videos, because people always say like, oh, if things are good between you and your husband, why do you still go to marriage counseling? When we started marriage counseling, my husband and I were on a direct road to divorce, and that was really why we started marriage counseling. To be honest with you, at the time that we started marriage counseling, I thought that we would get divorced. I didn't think that marriage counseling would save it whatsoever. But through that process, it has not only saved our marriage and made our marriage 100% better, but it's also, really helped my life and my husband's individual life as well. Today we go to marriage counseling because we look at it very much like we would look at a vocal coach. And I explain this a lot in a lot of different videos, that a lot of musicians, really famous musicians, have vocal coaches because they want to have the best voice they possibly can. And that's really why we still go to marriage counseling today. We don't go as much as we used to go. We go every 2 to 3 weeks and things like that. And we just kind of like, today we'll probably like talk about our trip that we took to Las Vegas. I was actually telling my therapist earlier, I was like, we don't really have a lot to talk about tonight, marriage counseling. He's like, well, that's okay. It's, good to check in every once in a while. So that's what we're doing tonight. But recently, I would say about 6 months ago, and I talked about it over here, I did a trauma narrative associated with the accident. So my therapist suggested that we do what is called a trauma narrative. And it's a list of questions that you go through. And the questions are all kinds of about your emotional reaction to things and whatever. And I was so stuck in remorse and guilt over the accident and just really, really struggling each and every day. For those of you that don't know, I was in a fatal car accident in February of 2022, and I was driving the car, and I had an epileptic seizure while I was driving the car. And so I just really, really struggled with it. What's interesting is I guess it was longer than 6 months ago, because at the time that I was doing the trauma narrative was when I had the opportunity to talk to the mother of the man that passed away in the accident. And it was just life-changing for me. And in all honesty, I was just talking about this in a vlog the other day. It wasn't so much at the time and what she said. It kind of unfolded over the next month or two, and kind of how I did things and how I looked at the world. I don't know that I would have been able to have the conversation that I had with her had I not been therapeutically working on issues and then doing the trauma narrative and things like that, that it really, really helped doing the trauma narrative. And so the trauma narrative was going through the trauma that had occurred and basically unpacking each and every piece of it. I think on one of my videos, I actually went in and I read all the questions from the trauma narrative to kind of let you guys know what those questions were. So with my past therapist, we were in a session one day, and I was talking about having this long history of being bullied when I was growing up, from the first moment in school that I can remember all the way through high school and past high school and things like that, being bullied. over being effeminate, over being gay, and things like that. I was never out. I didn't come out until after I came out of high school, but people just assumed that I was. And so he had said to me one time, and whenever I would talk to people about bullying, today we take it very, very seriously in school systems, but when I was growing up, I entered first grade I was born in 72, so 79, and I graduated in 90. And during those years, bullying wasn't something that was talked about or taken very seriously. In fact, I can remember talking to a few teachers and some administrators, and basically their response to me was kind of like, man up, like toughen up, and just this is part of what goes along with being a kid. And so I didn't really have anybody that ever took me seriously. Over time, what I learned to do was just to not say anything about it or address it, and just kind of learn to deal with it, and that's what happened. And so through the years, it just kind of like stayed there. Now, you're talking about foundation years of me being a kid, and what I learned was that living in fear was just normal, And so I just dealt with that. Well, when we went to see our first couples counselor, couples therapist, marriage counselor, I was in an individual session, and we were talking about the bullying and how I respond to the world today. And the only way I can explain it is that I have a lot of friends of mine that are on Al-Anon. Al-Anon is a 12-step program for friends and family members of alcoholics and addicts. Mostly alcoholics, but I have friends of mine that, let's say if they grew up with an alcoholic parent and they're now like 65, and their parent might have passed away 40 years ago, and they still go to Al-Anon because they respond to the world having been raised by an alcoholic, okay? So it's not a just get over it kind of thing. It's not a just deal with it, grow up, get over it kind of thing. It's fundamentally how people are formed in this world to respond to the world. I have friends of mine that were in marriages or relationships with an alcoholic, and they've been divorced or out of that relationship for 20 plus years, and they still attend Al-Anon, they still work an Al-Anon program because of how they respond to the world. That doesn't mean that they're bad people. Alcoholics and people in Al-Anon and other 12-step programs are not bad people they're not bad people trying to get good. We're sick people trying to get well, and it's about understanding how we respond to the world. So for me, it's when I was talking to my therapist about this, my original therapist, and about how I respond to the world having grown up being bullied, because I think I do a lot. I still do respond to the world from having been bullied. He said to me, has anybody ever suggested to you that you suffered PTSD in association with being bullied, post-traumatic stress disorder? And I'm not somebody that is like big on diagnoses. Now, I do have several diagnoses, but the reason why I like talking about them is because it helps me understand how I maneuver the world differently. I think, in 30, 40 years when we've destigmatized a lot of these diagnoses, especially mental health diagnoses and personality disorders and addictions and things like that, what we'll do is we'll look at the world in a different way. And somebody having these diagnoses is just a different language that they speak and going through the world. It doesn't make them bad or different or weird. It just makes it that they view the world in a different way. Me understanding my diagnoses is a way for me to understand the world that I live in and how I respond to it. And that's how I love it. So when he said that to me, it wasn't so much about this diagnosis of being PTSD. What I heard was, what you went through was so serious that you might have suffered traumatic aftermath as a result of that. It was the first time in my history that somebody had said something to me that made me feel seen over the bullying. I felt like my entire life I had talked about it to people, and everybody had kind of minimized what happened to me. It was the first time that I ever felt like I was really seen in that, right? So, in talking to my current therapist about it, we had just done this trauma narrative. The trauma narrative was extremely helpful in me working through my response of remorse and guilt and responsibility and not being able to move on and feeling very stuck in what happened with the accident. And he said, the trauma narrative was so helpful to you. What if we did a trauma narrative over you being bullied, since your previous therapist said that, possibly you suffer PTSD as a result of being bullied? And I said, do you think I did? And he goes, oh, 100%, I think you did. He goes, I think you still respond to the world from that. And he said, I think it would be really, really helpful. Well, we started it like 2 sessions ago. So today in our session, and this was the specific point I wanted to talk about, we were talking about what were the emotions that I felt when I first was being bullied or during those early years of being bullied. And it was hard because I can remember specific incidences, but I don't know that I necessarily remember exactly how I felt. And I said to him, I said, and I explained this to him, and I said, well, I remember feeling a lot of fear because I never knew when it was going to happen, how it was going to happen, where it was going to come from, and I knew that nobody was going to defend me. I knew that no teacher was going to defend me. No kid in class, no matter how friendly I was with them, was going to stand. This is one of the reasons why I didn't have a lot of friends, was because nobody wanted to be around me, because then they would be the target of the bullying too. So it was a very lonely childhood. And I said, I just remember a lot of fear. I said, and a lot of confusion over it too, because I didn't really understand it. I mean, when they would make fun of me for how I walked or how I talked and things like that, like, I knew that I walked differently than how the other boys did, or I knew that I sounded differently. I could hear my voice. I knew that, right? But I was young. I don't know that when it first started, I even had like crushes on, other guys and stuff like that. And so it didn't really make sense to me. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand what is so wrong with me that these people hate me. I didn't get it, right? And, we talked a lot in there about, he said to me that, he's done a lot of work on bullying, and extensive work on bullying. He works with kids that are bullied today and stuff like that. And he said, bullying, people that bully, it's really not about who they're picking out. It's really not about their target. It's really about what's going on with them inside. It's really about their lack of, happiness in the world, and they're not happy with themselves. And all these things are things I've heard a million times through the years, but I know it's true, right? Like, that people that do all these kinds of things are really unhappy in their own lives. I get that, right? I think it's different when you're talking about like a 5 or 6 year old. And I said to him, I said, I look at pictures of myself when I was that age, and I have like this smile on my face and whatever, but I said, it makes me really sad looking at those pictures, because that kid was a really lonely kid. I didn't tell my parents I was being bullied because I didn't want them to worry about me. I was literally alone in it. I hardly ever talked to teachers about it. Every once in a blue moon when I was kind of forced to talk about it, nobody in my life really knew, my dad later said that he kind of wondered, but like, I never told my mom until after I was out of high school, because I didn't want her worried about me. And so I lived in this complete loneliness and silence with not a lot of friends and really nobody around me. And I'm not asking anybody to feel sorry for me. I'm explaining the story because I think it's important in looking at how I maneuver the world today as a very independent person that likes to spend a lot of time alone. And so we were talking about this in emotions, and he was like, so those were the only emotions you had, like fear and confusion? And I said, yeah. And I said, you work with a lot of people that are bullied. He was like, I work with kids that are actively being bullied right now in schools. And I said, what are emotions that most people feel in relation to being bullied? And he said, self-hatred, low self-worth, and they just don't feel that they're worth anything. Like, they really hate themselves. Like, they buy into what the bullies are saying. And I thought about it for a second. I said, that's so interesting that you say that to me, because I don't know, maybe there were times that I hated myself, but it's weird. Like, when I finally started connecting it, like, people ask me a lot, like, when did you know you were gay? And I can't really pinpoint the moment that I knew. You would think that it's like this, revelationary moment that you would know, like, okay, on this date, whatever. I don't. I just remember having crushes on boys and girls, and then it was just mostly, guys that I had crushes on when I was growing up. And, but I don't remember what year that was. I would say like sometime between 2nd and 4th grade. I can remember kind of more in 4th grade, but I don't remember earlier than that. And I said, I've had friends of mine, and I've talked to so many people because I've done so many anti-bullying campaigns and worked with school administrators and stuff like that on educating them about bullying. And I've sat down with bullies, and I've sat down with people that are being bullied and whatever. And I know so much about it. And I've known people that are bullied for their hair, and I've known people that are bullied for not being clean, or being too thin, or being too heavy, or, racial backgrounds and academic, like not being smart in a class, or not being able to get good grades on a class, or struggling, or people that have, developmental issues, or people, I've known people that get bullied for every single thing in the entire world. I said, they were bullying me over something that, yes, all those things are things that people can't change, but like, I don't know why it makes it different for me, but like, I was always afraid to come out to my parents, right? But I also, in that same note, knew I knew this, that my parents, that were very loving and compassionate people, were never going to look at me and say, get the fuck out of the house. Like, they loved me unconditionally. I knew that. I knew I just had to say the words and they were going to embrace me in love, which is exactly what happened. I knew that that was going to happen, right? So I think that when I finally put 2 and 2 together, that I'm being bullied over being gay, and I am gay, what I felt later was that they had stolen my coming out from me, is what I felt like. They stole that part of my story. But I never struggled with self-hatred because I didn't hate myself over being gay. I've known a lot of people that do. I know a lot of people that hate themselves because they grew up in religious families and religious, organizations where it was taught to be gay was wrong. I wasn't taught that. I was taught that love is love is love. Long before anybody ever said that, I was taught that. I was taught that God doesn't make junk, and God loves whoever you are. I was taught that by both of my parents, by friends of my parents, by my family. I was taught that. And so when I went home, even going home to a mother that was an alcoholic, and, I went home and she wasn't like, and I talk a lot about my mom's, addiction, that she got sober 6 months after I did, but I think the misconception is that my mom was like drunk all the time. That wasn't the case. I mean, it was here and there. But there were a lot of moments that I came home to Little House on the Prairie dinners and whatever. I didn't know what I was coming home to. That was a lot of the fear with that. But I always came home to what I knew was a loving home. I knew that my parents didn't hate me. I knew that they wouldn't hate me if I came out that I was gay. And so I'm being picked on for something that internally, I think it's part of why my coming out really wasn't, I remember years ago somebody telling me to do a video about my coming out story, and I was like, that I was told, I said, there's nothing exciting about my story. Both of my parents were very loving about it. My friends were pretty accepting. It was just like, they were like, but you don't know, you might be helping somebody. So I ended up doing a video about that. But I think like the fact that I had loving parents that loved me no matter what, I think made all the difference for me. I really do. I think it's why I didn't have the stigma of self-hatred. Because we were talking about it today, and he goes, well, I know people that are bullied over being gay and they have self-hatred. I think it's a lot about the environment that you have, that no matter what you're being bullied for, the environment that you live in at that time, the environment that you are surrounded with at that time, no matter if you're being bullied for your hair, or because you're not getting the same grades as somebody else and you're struggling academically, or because you have mental health issues, or because of, your racial background, or because of your weight. None of that is right. None of it is right. Nobody should be bullied for any of that stuff. None of that is right, right? But in trying to translate that and make sense of that, I didn't even need to be having those conversations with my parents. I don't really know, to be honest with you, that if I did and they got involved, it would have really made it better. My fear was that it was going to make it worse. I have learned in life that that is the case, okay? Is that when you come for the people that are bullying you, it just makes it 10 times worse. I learned that in first grade, and I think that to be true. I don't know that telling my parents and them getting involved, them moving me schools, I think if I had moved schools, it would have been the same at any other school that I would have gone to. I don't know, maybe not, but knowing that I was loved, knowing that I was loved for throwing a puppet show, or my Aunt Janny making a wedding dress out of newspaper, and knowing I was loved for that, or knowing that I was loved because I loved to watch pageants with my mom, or read a book, or go to the library, or, do a show for my dad, and I was loved for whoever I was. I think that overpowered all the rest of it. And yes, it had such a significant impact on my life. I still, to this day, at 52 years old, feel the impressions of being bullied when I was 7 years old. It still is how I look at the world today. I don't know that that will ever change. Maybe through doing this narrative, I will learn a little bit more about myself and maybe respond in a different way to the world around me. But I still respond to like a scared cat that's like, this in certain situations in my life. But the message that I think I want to send to people is love your kid, with all the mistakes that my parents made in their life and the struggles that they had, they did their best. But one thing that they never faulted on was knowing, of them letting me know that they loved me. I'm forever grateful for that. You know, I say on here a lot that parents are, you know, underrated and underpaid. Like, I mean, it's like the most important job in this entire world, you know? I don't know what I would have felt had I been bullied in school, and I have friends of mine that grew up in homes like that, and then went home and I was told that I was a worthless piece of shit. That I went home and I was told that I didn't matter. If I went home and I was told that I wasn't loved. Not only if I was told that, but if I was taught that by being hit or being abused or being neglected. I don't know what would have happened to me today. What I do know is that that wasn't my story. And as horrific as it was at school, and even having a mother that was in active alcoholism, I knew profoundly that my parents loved me. I knew I was loved. I knew I was good enough. And I think that that made all the difference. And we were talking about it today. He's like, that is something that you have carried from your youth all the way through today. You still have that in you today. He was like, Peter, I see that in you every time we talk. He was like, you know you're loved. You know you're not junk, right? And I think that's so important because we can't take away the pain that people are going to go through in life, but we can give them a soft place to land. You know, we can give them a soft place to land. And I think that as parents, if I could give anybody out there a lesson, it's not necessarily 100% of the time about quizzing your kids about everything that's going on in their life or having to know everything about that's going on in their life or even knowing the details of what's going on at school or with their friends or with their peer group or all that kind of stuff. Sometimes it's just letting them know they're loved. For me, it made all the difference. Anyway, I wanted to share that with you guys. If you're interested in me sharing more about what I'm going through right now with this narrative, I'm more than willing to share that. I love you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.